They called me a practice run, not a daughter, not a legacy, just a test model my father used before he decided to build the real family. That night, under the glittering chandeliers of a Boston ballroom, his words landed like a blade in front of hundreds of witnesses. He raised his glass, his tuxedo shining in the camera lights, his voice booming through the mic. "Every great project needs a trial run," he said with a laugh, pausing long enough for the crowd to hang on his punchline. "And I want to thank my practice kid, wherever she is, for letting me work out the kinks before I got it right, with my only daughter, Amber." The applause was polite nervous. A ripple of laughter floated through the tables, forced and thin like air leaking from a balloon. Faces turned toward me, some curious, some pitying, others deliberately avoiding my corner of the room as if shame might be contagious. I sat still, a glass of water in my hand, every muscle locked in place. Inside, though, something cold was forming. Not anger that burns and fades, but anger that freezes sharp enough to cut. Amber, my half-sister, the golden child, stood beside him in a white gown glowing under the lights. At 23, she had just been commissioned as an officer in the Air Force. My father beamed at her like she was the sunrise itself. He called her the first real officer of the family, the first, as if the ceremony I'd gone through years earlier had never existed, as if my rank, my service, my sacrifices were nothing more than a clerical error. He had erased me with a single sentence, and worse, he wanted the room to clap for it. But the room didn't know what I knew. They didn't know the admin job my father mocked was a cover. They didn't know the quiet daughter in the corner had spent the last 5 years directing surveillance operations that shaped national security. They didn't know that behind the paperwork excuse I wore a different title, Major Evelyn Reed. To my father, I was beige wallpaper. To my commanding officers, I was a weapon. Still, perception was his religion, and this wedding was his cathedral. He paraded Amber as proof that he had perfected fatherhood the second time around. I was just the draft version, an inconvenient footnote. The insult was calculated. It wasn't the first time. At cookouts, he'd wave off questions about me with a smirk. "Oh, Evelyn, she's pushing paper in D.C., some government desk job. Boring stuff." The dismissal was so efficient, so practiced that people stopped asking, and I let them. Silence was safer. But this was different. This wasn't a side comment. This was a declaration. He wanted the world to know his pride lived in one daughter only. I remembered the letter from my attorney just weeks earlier, the one I hadn't dared to open until after work. The one confirming what I already suspected my father's will listed Amber as sole heir to his estate. Every property, every account, every trace of wealth. My name wasn't even a footnote. He had written me out in private. Tonight, he wrote me out in public. The betrayal was complete. Yet as the laughter faded and the clinking of glasses returned, I didn't move. My breathing slowed. My training years of compartmentalization slid into place like armor. This wasn't a time for tears or shouting. That would only prove his story. No, if he wanted a spectacle, I would give him one, but not the one he expected. From my seat in the shadows, I shifted slightly, angling my hand so the overhead lights caught the dark gleam of the ring on my finger. A small band of metal most people would mistake for jewelry, but not Amber. She'd recognize it instantly. It wasn't decorative. It was earned. It was a service ring tied to a command she'd studied but never touched. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to stand. All I had to do was wait, because sooner or later, Amber's gaze would wander. And when it did, the real story of this family would start to unravel one silent glance at a ring her textbooks had warned her never to ignore. When people ask where the distance started, they expect a date on a calendar, a fight, a slammed door. With my father, the distance was built like a highway, one poured section at a time, smooth and permanent. I was 9 the first time he missed an award ceremony. Client dinner, he said, tossing the excuse like a set of keys. Mom smoothed my dress and told me to be understanding. I was. I held it so tightly my knuckles hurt. By 13, I'd stopped leaving a chair open for him. By 16, I'd learned to offer him headlines instead of details I got in, because details gave him more surface area to sand down. He had a way of making my work sound beige. If I showed him a robotics trophy, he mocked the plastic base. If I talked about physics, he sighed about real-world skills. He loved visible things, front rows, microphones, plaques he could photograph. My wins never photographed well. They sounded like late nights and library light. They looked like me alone solving the same problem from 4 angles until it surrendered. Some say favoritism happens by accident. In our house, it felt engineered. When Amber arrived, the attention distribution changed like a company switching software. My father became fluent in her milestones, their dates, the proper nouns, the exact GPA, while mine blurred into minor notes. He didn't have to say she matters more. He automated it. College gave me distance, but not oxygen. I worked 2 campus jobs and studied because it felt like the one place he couldn't intercept me. I learned to make quiet choices. I learned to treat hunger as a constraint, not a crisis. On good nights, future me felt close enough to touch. She was steady. She didn't circle the block of her own house to practice arriving without hope. The first time I stepped through an unmarked door at Fort Meade, the air changed. Cold, dry, humming with a kind of purpose you can taste. In the windowless rooms, everyone's voice carried the same weight, measured, precise, ruthlessly focused on the next right move. No one asked who your father was, they asked for your read, and you'd better have one. "Walk me through it," General Peters said the day he learned my name. Not a smile, not a scowl, a test. I laid out signal overlaps, a timing anomaly, a blind spot in a billion-dollar constellation that had masqueraded as noise. He didn't say good job. He said again, slower. Show me the miss everyone else made. I did. When I finished, he nodded one short surgical approval. Assign her to Echo. If she's wrong, we'll know in a day. If she's right, we'll save a month. That nod felt like oxygen. It wasn't affection. It was respect. It was someone staking their name on mine in a place where stakes were real. But respect came with conditions. The work lived behind layers of silence. I learned new ways to lie without technically lying. At holidays, when my father paraded Amber's training milestones, her CO says she's leadership material. He turned to me for his favorite performance. And Evelyn, she's in some government office with the forms. Mountains of forms. People laughed. I smiled like a seatbelt automatic restraining. The cover story saved operations and ruined small talk. Friends drifted when I dodged questions too often. A boy I liked called me cagey and then cold. Maybe I was. Maybe cold is what competence feels like in a world that confuses warmth with explanation. You can't explain classified. You absorb the accusation and press mute on the part of yourself that wants to be understood. I kept a shoebox of proofs under my bed, printed emails approving budgets, a commendation with 3/4 of the words, blacked out a photo of a hallway no one could photograph. On the rough nights, I'd open it and count. 5, 10, 15 pages that anchored me to the version of me that existed when the lights were off and the servers hummed. I never showed the box to anyone. Some victories you hold against your own skin. Whispers circulated never in our living room, always just outside it. Some say Richard's first kid isn't leadership material, a family friend joked once too loudly. My father corrected him with a smile sharp enough to cut. She's useful. Paperwork is useful. Useful like a stapler. Replaceable. Stored in a drawer. Of all the small brutalities, the will hurt most for how tidy it was. A man can choose dull words in public and sharp lines in private. The attorney's letter sat on my counter for 3 days before I opened it. Amber as sole heir. Real estate liquid assets, the lake house I learned to swim in the watch. He promised me when I was 12 if I kept being exceptional. I had been. He'd forgotten the promise or rewritten it mid-sentence. The law is good at pretending that promises were never spoken. I didn't cry. Tears felt like a concession in a game I hadn't agreed to play. I made tea. I washed the cup. I answered a message from Echo about an anomaly in a packet stream over the Mediterranean and went back to the version of my life where my name mattered. You learn to live with twin clocks. One counts public time birthdays announcements, toasts you can film. The other counts private time briefings, red teams decisions that end with a handshake and a classified footer. I had mastered the second clock. The first still had the power to bruise. I tell you all this so you understand my silence at the wedding wasn't surrender. It was posture. It was the stillness you see on the ocean before the undertow pulls. My father thought humiliation would make me smaller. He forgot that quiet is where I get dangerous. My mentor's last advice before he rotated out of my chain of command lived in my chest that night, like a second heartbeat. Precision over performance, he'd said, tapping the table between us. The show belongs to people who need it. The result belongs to the person who doesn't. He didn't know Richard or Amber. He didn't need to. The principle travels. So I calibrated. I mapped exits cameras' sight lines without meaning to. I chose a table with a clean angle to the head dais and a wall at my back, because habit is a kind of prayer you don't have to think about. I set my glass down where it would catch the chandelier's scatter. I did not plan to stand. I planned to be seen by exactly one person. That's the thing about training, it rewires your patience. It teaches you that a single beat held long enough can change the direction of a room. It teaches you to trust the part of yourself that already knows how this ends. Everyone else in that ballroom thought the story had peaked with a cheap joke. They were wrong. Because in a few minutes, Amber's gaze would find me. Her training would outrank her blood, and the silence he wanted to weaponize against me would carry my name further than his microphone ever could. And then the petals would fall. The ballroom hummed with the kind of noise only money can buy: crystal glasses, colliding violin strings, weaving through small talk, camera shutters clicking in rhythm with the chandeliers above. My father was in his element, chest-puffed tuxedo jacket gleaming, spinning a narrative he'd rehearsed for decades. Amber smiled beside him, flawless and glowing, the living proof of his so-called perfection. I sat at my table in the far corner, an island in a sea of polite laughter. My pulse was steady, my breathing measured. I wasn't Evelyn the daughter tonight. I wasn't the practice kid. I was Major Reed cloaked in a dress and silence waiting. And then it happened. The shift. The first fracture in his immaculate glass facade. Amber's gaze sweeping lazily across the crowd, drinking in their admiration, stalled on me. For half a second, her expression remained blissful, unguarded. But then her eyes dropped instinctively, scanning the details. The tilt of my posture, the steadiness of my hands, and finally, the ring. The service ring wasn't ornate, dark, simple, unremarkable to most. But to Amber, fresh out of the academy, it was a thunderclap. She'd memorized its image from textbooks, whispered about it in late-night cadet circles. That band wasn't jewelry. It was authority. It was earned by officers whose names carried weight in classified corridors she hadn't even stepped into yet. Her smile didn't just falter, it shattered. I watched the calculation ripple across her face in real-time recognition, colliding with disbelief collapsing into fear. She wasn't looking at Evelyn, the boring sister with a government desk job. She was looking at a superior officer, a ghost from her own study guides. The bouquet slipped from her fingers. White roses exploded against the polished floor petals, scattering like snowflakes caught in a storm. The room hushed, not out of respect, but confusion. Every camera flash seemed to freeze her unraveling in 1,000 tiny frames. My father was mid-sentence, his voice booming with self-satisfaction, when he noticed her silence. "Amber," he muttered into the mic, irritation creeping into his smile. "Amber what?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her training had already taken over, her spine locked straight, shoulders squared, chin tucked, and in one fluid motion so sharp it sliced the air, she raised her hand to her brow in a salute. The sound of it, the crisp snap of her palm, was louder than the music, louder than the whispers, louder than my father's confusion. "Ma'am!" she said, voice trembling but amplified by the microphone. "My apologies. I didn't see you." The words detonated like a bomb no one expected. Silence swallowed the room. Glasses froze mid-air, forks hovered over plates. Hundreds of guests turned their heads at once, following Amber's rigid gaze to the woman in the shadows, the one they'd ignored, dismissed, pitied. Me. Richard's smile evaporated. His jaw slackened into disbelief, then tightened into rage. He fumbled for control, his voice cracking in the speakers. "Amber, put your hand down. This is your wedding, for God's sake." But Amber didn't move. Her salute held. Her eyes wide with a cocktail of awe and terror never left mine. Every instinct she'd been drilled with at the academy demanded obedience to rank, not bloodline, and her body obeyed. The guests, caught between confusion and revelation, began to murmur. The sound rolled through the ballroom like a storm tide. Who is she? Why is she saluting her? Did she just call her ma'am? The questions layered louder, sharper, until even the band fell silent. I stayed seated, composed, letting the silence do the work. My father's empire of perception was crumbling, not with an outburst, but with one word spoken into a microphone, "Ma'am." Every story he'd spun about me being insignificant was collapsing in real time. His golden child had just revealed the truth he'd buried for years. The practice kid was the one with real authority. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. My stillness was enough. The hierarchy had shifted irrevocably before an audience of hundreds. And Richard Jensen, a man who worshipped image above all else, had just been humiliated by the very image he tried to erase. But the real shock, the one no one was prepared for, was still to come. Amber's arm stayed locked in place, her salute razor-sharp, unshaken by her father's command. Her bouquet lay in ruins at her feet, petals crushed beneath the sequined hem of her gown. The ballroom, moments ago alive with music and applause, had become a cathedral of silence. Richard's voice cracked through the mic, desperate, frantic. "Amber, stop this nonsense. This isn't appropriate." But his words had no weight. Not here, not against the uniform carved into her spine. Everyone in that room could see it. Amber wasn't moving, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't. Training outranked blood. The system he worshipped when it glorified her now bound her to me. I rose slowly, deliberately, letting every eye follow the motion. My chair scraped against the polished floor with a sound that echoed like a verdict. I stood tall, not as his forgotten daughter, but as the officer his golden child had just acknowledged in front of 300 witnesses. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some clutched their pearls, others whispered furiously, phones discreetly lifted to record. For years, Richard had painted me beige. Tonight, the truth refracted like a diamond under a spotlight. I held Amber's gaze across the distance. Her eyes were wide, glistening with the weight of realization. She wasn't looking at Evelyn, the draft daughter. She was looking at Major Reed, the superior officer her textbooks warned her to respect. I gave a single measured nod, the kind that dismisses, not encourages. The kind that says, "You've done your duty." That's enough. Amber's arm trembled, then lowered with perfect precision, snapping back to her side. The crowd exhaled as if they'd all been holding their breath. Richard, red-faced and sweating, lunged for control. "What are you doing?" he hissed, forgetting the mic was still live. His voice blasted through the speakers, raw and panicked. "She's nothing. She's nobody. Do you hear me?" The words landed like acid, but this time they didn't burn me. They burned him. The guests recoiled at his venom whispers, rising, eyes narrowing. The man who thrived on perception was unraveling in front of his own carefully curated audience. Amber flinched, shame cutting across her face. She shook her head just once, but enough for the cameras to catch. For the first time, she wasn't protecting him. She was protecting me. The whispers turned into a low murmur, the kind that spreads like fire in dry grass. "She's military." He lied. "Did you see the salute?" "What rank is she?" Phones buzzed as photos and clips spread before dessert had even been served. I didn't need to say a word. The truth had spoken for me through protocol older than this family feud. Richard's empire, built on polished speeches and golden child narratives, was collapsing in real time. His attempt at humiliation had transformed into his public undoing, and he knew it. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, his grip tightening on the microphone as though squeezing harder might restore his authority. But the room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the silence, to the salute, to the truth made visible. I took one step forward, not rushing, not dramatic, just enough to let the cameras follow, enough to let the guests lean in. Richard's eyes widened with something I'd never seen in him before, not anger, not disappointment, fear. He'd spent decades convincing the world I was irrelevant. Tonight, that lie had bled out under the lights in front of every friend, colleague, and ally he'd ever tried to impress. And the night wasn't over yet, because walking away would be louder than any speech. The decision to walk wasn't born from anger. It was born from clarity. I let my father's words dissolve into the static hum of the room. His voice cracked, begging for control, but it no longer touched me. I had already shifted into a different orbit, one where his approval was neither currency nor oxygen. So I moved. Each step across the ballroom floor was deliberate, steady. My heels struck the polished tile with the cadence of a gavel. Heads turned, necks craned. Whispers trailed me like smoke. Every guest who had once pitied me now watched in reverent silence, unsure whether they were witnessing humiliation or history. Richard's voice chased after me, sharp and panicked. "Evelyn, sit down, don't you dare, I didn't turn, I didn't need to." The power dynamic had already shifted, and every camera in the room had recorded it. His empire of perception, crafted through years of selective storytelling, was crumbling in front of its audience. Amber remained frozen at the head table, her arm trembling at her side, eyes locked on me like a cadet awaiting orders. For all her beauty, for all the pride he paraded her with, she couldn't break training. She had recognized my authority, and that recognition had rewritten the script of the night. At the doors, I paused just long enough to let the silence deepen. 100 stares pressed into my back. The music had stopped. Even the waitstaff stood motionless, trays hovering in midair. I placed a hand on the brass handle, inhaled once, then pushed through into the night. The cool Boston air hit me like absolution. Behind me, the ballroom exploded into chaos gasps, Mutter's phones buzzing with live uploads. My father's voice, once a booming instrument of pride, broke into fragmented pleas. He would spend the rest of that evening drowning in explanations he could never quite finish. But I didn't stay to watch. I had no interest in the collapse. My victory wasn't in his downfall. It was in my decision to leave on my own terms. 1 year later, the memory of that ballroom has dulled gold leaf and chandeliers, fading into something almost absurd. Now the walls around me are gray, functional humming with encrypted servers and secure phone lines. The light outside my office window falls across the Washington Monument. There are no chandeliers here, no champagne toasts, just responsibility. My desk plate doesn't say practice kid, it says Lieutenant Colonel Reed. The promotion came 6 months after the wedding. General Peters himself pinned the silver oak leaves to my collar, his eyes steady proud. No speeches, no applause, just a handshake and 4 quiet words: "You've earned every inch." He was right. I had. Here, legacy isn't measured by inheritance or empty toasts. It's measured by the trust of the people beside you. My team is my family now, not by blood, but by bond. Intelligence, analysts, linguists, cryptographers, each of them brilliant. Each of them knowing that when I speak, it isn't noise, it's command. Some nights as I walk the secure hallways, I think about the will, about how Richard carved me out completely, leaving everything to Amber. I thought it would sting more, but it doesn't. His estate feels like a relic, a collection of things that glitter in public and corrode in private. My wealth isn't in property lines, it's in decisions that save lives. It's in the kind of respect that doesn't evaporate when the lights turn off. I keep no shoebox of proofs now. My proof is living, breathing, working alongside me every day. Richard still throws parties, or so I've heard. He fills banquet halls with laughter-rehearsed anecdotes and the same fragile empire of perception. But there's a catch. He He can never erase the night his golden child saluted the daughter he called Practice. The night his joke backfired and exposed the truth. That story circulates in whispers, now bigger than his attempts to bury it. Guests told their friends told their colleagues, clips leaked online. The image of a bride saluting her sister at her own wedding has traveled farther than any of his speeches ever could. It's ironic. He wanted me invisible. Instead, I became unforgettable. Walking out of that ballroom wasn't an end. It was a transfer of gravity. His orbit no longer pulled me. Mine was stronger. And in the silence of my office today, with classified files spread across the desk, I finally understand my legacy doesn't need his name. It was never his to give. It arrived like any other email. No subject line shouting for attention, no flagged priority. Just a neat entry in my inbox one quiet morning, tucked between a situation report and a logistics update. The sender, First Lieutenant Amber Jensen. I stared at it for a moment, my coffee cooling beside me. The message was short, precise, written in the clipped formality of a junior officer. She apologized for our father's conduct profusely, sincerely. She said she'd been blindsided, humiliated, and most of all ashamed of how long she had believed the story he told about me. And then came the line that froze me in place. "Ma'am, I am requesting 15 minutes of your time in the coming weeks for counsel. Officer to officer, no sisterly plea, no family overture, just the acknowledgement of a chain of command she could not ignore." For a long time, I didn't move. My office buzzed around me, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the muffled footsteps of analysts racing to briefings, but I sat still, rereading the words. Our father had wanted hierarchy, but only on his terms. He had built it out of favoritism and performance. The system he worshipped had turned on him, reshaping his golden child into my subordinate. Amber was no longer the heir. She was the petitioner. I should have felt triumph, maybe even revenge. Instead, what I felt was distance. Not cold, not cruel, just distance. The kind that comes when you finally realize the war you fought for years ended long ago, and the battlefield is empty, except for echoes. I archived the email. Not deleted, not answered, archived. It would be there when I chose to return to it. On my time, not his, not hers. That night in the ballroom, my father thought he was erasing me with a laugh line. Instead, he immortalized me with silence. He believed legacy was something shouted into a microphone. I've learned it's something earned in the quiet spaces, through respect, through trust, through the invisible work that outlasts applause. The truth is, I don't need the will he wrote me out of. I don't need the estate or the empty titles. My inheritance is the command I've built, the lives I've safeguarded, the team that calls me colonel without hesitation. My family isn't blood, it's bond, it's loyalty. It's the soldier beside me who knows I'll never let their voice be dismissed the way mine once was. And Amber, whether she realizes it yet or not, has already stepped into my orbit. Not because of our father's design, but because she finally recognized the weight of who I am. So maybe you've been overlooked. Maybe someone you trusted chose a favorite and made sure you knew it wasn't you. Maybe you've been written out of someone else's script, treated like a draft version of the life they really wanted. I'm here to tell you, your story doesn't end there. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't shouting. It's rising in silence until the people who underestimated you can't ignore you anymore. Until they're the ones asking for your time, your guidance, your map. And when that moment comes, you get to decide what happens next. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Have you ever had to build your worth outside their shadow? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you felt this one hit, like, subscribe and share it. Because here, your value isn't decided by anyone else. It's recognized, always.